Welcome to New York City, where it is slowly becoming fall. Thank you, God, for fall. In the summer, my block is a zoo. Just when you think you've seen everything, there's a guy walking down the street and his t-shirt says, "Women have vagina. Women have vagina." And two girls on the corner said, well, he's not wrong about that. Anyway, I thought it would be cool to do an overview of the great Miles Davis, the great trumpeter and band leader and composer and conductor in a way, born in 1926, passed in 1991. If you're just getting into jazz, you probably hear that name, Miles Davis. I guess he's somebody great. There's a really great documentary out on him right now called Birth of the Cool. I think of Miles as having like 5 or 6 distinct phases. His early bebop period, the great Charlie Parker on Swing Street, which there are recordings of that. The couple records he did on Blue Note, Volume 1 and 2. Then he hits his, what I think of as his prime, well, one of his primes, when he records for Prestige. He does the great series of records, the early records on Prestige, and then he founds his wonderful quintet with John Coltrane, Cannonball Adderley, Paul Chambers, and Philly Joe Jones. And he produced those fantastic records, cooking, steaming, working, relaxing. And then in 1959, he to get out of his contract, he does all those 5 records in like 2 weeks or something, so he can go to Columbia and make a lot more money and become a rock star. So we have his Columbia period, which is, there are many periods in the Columbia period. There are 3 records with Gil Evans, Sketches of Spain, Porgy and Bess, and my favorite, Miles Ahead. Then he does his the incredible 60s quintet, whose reverberations are still being felt today, with Tony Williams, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, and Ron Carter. And then I think of after that, I call it his ambient period, with Bitches Brew and In a Silent Way, or Silent Way and a Bitches Brew. Then his funk period, Water Babies on the Corner, Jack Johnson. And then the period which I think he's still largely misunderstood for, what I think of as the free electric period with Live Evil, Live at Fillmore West, those incredible churning, noise-filled records. And there are many, many side steps. The Lost Quintet, with that never recorded but toured with Dave Holland, Chick Corea, Jack DeJohnette, Herbie Hancock, Keith Jarrett. Did I say that? He's done soundtracks along the way, and many incredible live records. The first live record of his that I really became fully aware of was 4 and More, the live record with Tony Williams. As a young drummer, that just peeled my ears back. It was such an revolutionary record. He has other live records from that period, and now with the advent of digital and Pro Tools and Ableton Live and so much automation, it seems like every tape that was ever recorded at any live concert in Europe from a radio board or a club board has now been turned into a CD. We have many of those at Jazz Record Center if you're a completist. After that, he goes on Warner Brothers. Sort of go through the records that I actually own. You cannot, who owns all of Miles Davis's records? I don't know who that person is. I'm sure they're a completist. But between vinyl and CDs, the other amazing thing is I have a lot of vinyl, but then I also have a lot of CD, which I'll show you those collections at the end of this video. And many of those collections that Columbia put out are out of print already and very valuable. But I'll show you those. But anyway, we start with Miles Davis and the Modern Jazz Giants, recorded in 54, released in 59, with some of the great players of that period. Then we hit the records that were all recorded around 1956, but released in separate years. Workin' in 56, released in 59. Steamin', released in 56, released in 61. Relaxin', recorded in 56, released in 59. Then we have the new Miles Davis Quartet, recorded in 55, released in 56. That may be a collection. Then he enters his Gil Evans period, round about midnight, recorded in 55, released in 57. Miles Ahead, my favorite, recorded and released in 57. Miles Ahead, those are orchestral records with the great Gil Evans, whose albums are well worth searching out on their own. Into the Cool, I believe he did a few other ones, Amazing Impulse records, but they're the perfect choice, perfect combination of Miles' lyricism and ideas with Evans' beautiful orchestration. Those records, I believe, Miles Ahead, Round About Midnight, Sketches of Spain, those are meant, Porgy and Bess, those are meant to be listened to from start to finish because they're orchestral works. And they haven't been surpassed, I believe, by anyone as far as in a jazz setting with a large orchestra, beautiful compositions, beautiful arrangements and orchestrations. Then 1959, Milestones with, perhaps that's the last record with the great Quintet, with Red Garland, Paul Chambers, Coltrane, Adderley. Milestones is a classic record of hard driving, upbeat swing. It burns from start to finish. It's a great recording. Not all the Columbia records are great recordings. Everyone talks about 30th Street and all the amazing work done there. Amazing work may have been done there, but some of those recordings aren't amazing as far as recordings, and they've been bettered as reissues. A couple of his left turns, the jazz track, which I believe recorded in 57, released in 58, which was the elevator to the scaffold, lift to the scaffold, elevator to the gallows. Some of his most haunting playing, where he goes to France and records. I don't have in front of me who he recorded with, but that's a brilliant, essential soundtrack. And again, should be listened to from start to finish. Really a beautiful work. Then, of course, 1959, everybody's favorite record, Kind of Blue, is not my favorite record. I think it's a beautiful record. I don't think it's any better than any of his other records, even though there are incredible solos on there. Miles, Coltrane's solo on Blue and Green, and Gil Evans solos those are masterpieces unto themselves, and there are amazing performances on there. But to me, it's a still life. The Kind of Blue is a good entryway if you're just getting into Miles Davis and jazz. Even though I would rather, if it were me at a Jazz Record Center, I recommend to people to get the 50s Quintet, because the group is playing the Great American Songbook, which Miles and Frank Sinatra helped to popularize, and many other people. Those are readily accessible tunes that almost live in the DNA of most Americans, I think, whether they know it or not. But anyway, after Kind of Blue, the great Seven Steps to Heaven in 63, the live album Cut on the West Coast with drummer Frank Butler. Then we get into the amazing Quintet of the 60s with Herbie, Tony, Wayne, Ron Carter, ESP 1965, Miles Smiles 1966, Nefertiti 67, released in 68, Sorcerer 67, Miles in the Sky 68, each Philly di Kilimanjaro recorded and released in 68. Each one of those records gets progressively more out, progressively more chance taking, to me progressively more beautiful and exploratory and adventurous, not only with the compositions, many of which are penned by Wayne Shorter, but just the band and what they're doing. Each guy is just growing by leaps and bounds. It's shocking to where by the time they get to Philly di Kilimanjaro and Herbie's playing electric piano, it's just exploding. And it's obviously reflecting what's happening in the country in 1968, from riots in Detroit and Watts to Sly and the Family Stone to Helter Skelter, the Beatles and Charles Manson. And you can hear that in this record. In Philly di Kilimanjaro, it's funky, it's free, it's in the cut, it's burning, it's exotic, it's sexy, it's erotic, it's a dangerous record. But then Miles, the band's been exhausted, and I'm not sure if that's when the Lost Quintet was founded or if he goes straight to Silent Way. I think the Lost Quintet went on the road before he recorded Silent Way in 69 and Bitches Brew in 69 and 70. After all the escalating turmoil of each one of those records, ESP, Smiles, Nefertiti, Sorcerer, Miles in the Sky, he hits Silent Way, where it's like he just kind of steps back and breathes. Everything is slow. To me, it's almost an alternate companion piece for Stanley Kubrick's 2001. It's long expanses of minimal ambient sound. Things are moving slowly. It's sort of open, and to me it's very ambient. Then we have Bitches Brew, where he turns up the level just a little bit, and Bitches Brew is another piece that I believe needs to be listened to from start to finish. It's electric, it's funky, it's incredibly hypnotic. But they're just simmering on themes. They're just kind of exploring in a very barely awake kind of way. It's such a beautiful record, Bitches Brew. Then we get into more of the funky stuff. Jack Johnson, 70, released in 71. Oh, this is interesting. Live Evil is recorded in 70, released in 71. On the Corner, 1972. Big Fun, recorded in 72, released in 74. Get Up with It. and Water Baby 74, 76. And after that, actually, he does release some great records I don't have. The group of John Scofield and Al Foster and Mike Stern. Those are insane records. Get Up With It, You're Under Arrest. He's just throwing down that straight four slamming Al Foster pocket. But that band, all his guitar players in that period are just incredible. Mike Stern, John Scofield, Pete Cozy, just astounding guitar players. And that music is churning, and it's you have the straight up more commercial funk. I think he was trying to have a hit because he really dug Sly and the Family Stone. Who can blame him? And those records have a real pocket. Billy Cobham on Jack Johnson and On the Corner. And I think some of those sections, some of those tunes are sort of assembled. You know, there are so many compilations along the way from every label trying to squeeze money out of the Miles catalog. Coltrane and Miles Davis play Richard Rodgers. Miles Davis plays for Lovers. Miles Davis Jazz Classics. My Funny Valentine recorded with the Sixties Quintet, perhaps with George Coleman. But I wanted to show you also some of the CD box sets that Columbia put out. They sound beautiful, great liner notes, great photos, and those are worth searching out because they're only going to get more and more valuable. It's funny, Miles records, none of them are extremely collectible or valuable, probably because so many of them were sold, and that's pretty much the leitmotif of what makes a record valuable. Partially the performance, but it's also how many were pressed and how many were sold. And none of the Columbia records are that hard to find. We get them in and out of the store from time to time, and they don't go for crazy sums of money. None of them. Nothing like the Blue Note records in general. Anyway, this is just a very brief overview of Miles Davis, one of the most important figures of the 20th century. He formed some of the greatest jazz groups of all time. He chose some of the greatest jazz musicians of all time and elevated their careers and probably gave them incredible insight for them to lead their own groups. Would we have had John Coltrane as John Coltrane without Miles Davis? I don't know. Coltrane in the early Prestige records, he's fighting his drug habit. Miles fires him a couple times at least before he really gets his act together and is so incredible on those Quintet records before he forges his own way on Impulse. But would he have gotten there without Miles? Probably he would have, but I think he would have been different. In the same way that Herbie would have been different, Wayne Shorter would have been different, because Miles was an organizational genius. He knew what he wanted to hear without even saying very much to these musicians. And there hasn't been another Miles Davis since. No one even close. And I know they recently released his Rubber Band record, which from what I've heard is just, I'm sorry, it's just garbage. But if you have any questions, shoot them at me. If you have any comments, let me know what you think. I thank you so much for watching these videos. They're fun for me to make. The ones I make here in my home are harder to make. I have more fun roaming the streets of New York and making videos there. But thanks a lot for watching. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.